These stories are tales that have once been on the channel, and have been removed by myself for one reason or another. I feel it's time to give them a second life. Welcome to the archives. This is the story of Kelly Tristan, a 23-year-old woman who lived alone in a small house at 2605 Pine Road in the small town of Fairview, Oregon. Her disappearance had gone largely unnoticed until nearby residents started to go missing without a trace. When the police went to investigate the area, all the homes of the missing people were completely empty, as if no one had lived in them for quite a long time. Here is what happened. Sunday, October 31st, 2004. It was Halloween, Kelly's favorite time of year. She thought it would be a good idea to decorate her front door with some cheap decorations to let the kids know she was handing out candy. At 12:35 p.m., she drove to the local dollar store to buy Halloween candy and decorations. While browsing, she found a full shelf of old VHS tapes. As she looked through them, her eyes fell upon an old copy of Disney's 1951 classic, Alice in Wonderland. "Wow, I haven't seen this movie in a long time," she said to herself excitedly. Kelly decided to purchase it along with the candy and decorations. When she came back home, it was too early for trick-or-treaters to be out, so she took some time to prepare her front door. She continued decorating and filled a large pumpkin-shaped bowl with candy. By the time she was finished, it was nearly 4 p.m. She checked if there were any more decorations to put up. When she looked inside the plastic bag from the dollar store, she saw the Alice in Wonderland VHS box sitting all by itself. "Oh, I forgot about this. Maybe I could watch it before trick-or-treaters arrive." Kelly had a VCR DVD player in her living room, so she opened up the box to watch the movie. Something was strange about the tape. The movie's logo was on the front, but it was as if someone had tried to scratch it off with a knife. Kelly figured it must have been a used copy. As she took the movie out of the box, she noticed a strip of masking tape on the back of the video cassette with the words, "Play Me," written very poorly, as if a child had written it. "That's weird. Maybe someone was trying to be cute at the dollar store," she reassured herself. She closed her curtains, turned the television on, turned the lights off, and put the tape into the VCR. Kelly was shrouded in darkness, perfect for watching a movie. As the opening title cards were playing, Kelly laid herself down on the couch and was excited to be watching one of her favorite movies from her childhood. The movie started off normally with nothing out of the ordinary. The picture was a little faded, but it was tolerable for a used copy. For about 10 minutes, the movie played just fine. When it got to the scene showing Alice inside the bottle she drank from, strips of static started appearing on the screen. "What's going on?" Kelly started getting frustrated. "Please don't crap out on me." Suddenly, the entire screen went to static and the movie was gone. "Oh, come on." Kelly became angry and got up to see what was wrong with the tape. As she headed over to the television, the picture came back on. Only this time, it was not Alice in Wonderland. It was an old home video. Kelly was upset, but decided not to fast forward the tape. She was curious to see what the previous owner could possibly have recorded over the movie. The picture quality was not very good. The footage looked like it came from a 1970s home movie camera. The video was a small group of children gathered around a table with a little girl sitting at the end of it. She had long auburn hair and she wore a dress similar to what Alice wore. They were all singing happy birthday to her, and someone, most likely her mother, brought a cake out with lit candles and set it in front of the girl. As she blew the candles out, everyone started cheering. Kelly thought it was strange for someone to record this girl's birthday over the movie, but she kept watching to see what would happen next. As she made her way back to the couch, the video jumped to the children chasing each other in a game of tag-out in a large field. After about 2 minutes of tag, the video suddenly cut to static. It made Kelly's heart skip a beat. She laughed it off and continued watching the movie. After a few seconds, Alice in Wonderland was playing again. It started as Alice left Tweedledum and Tweedledee in the woods. For a few minutes, nothing happened to the movie. When Alice met the talking flowers and listened to them sing, the video cut to static again. As the picture became apparent, it showed the same children from earlier playing Ring Around the Rosie with the birthday girl in the middle of them. They were in the same field that they were playing tag in moments before. The camera filming it all was at a high angle, possibly from a 2-story window. Unlike the previous video segment, this one had no sound. The children were constantly spinning around the little girl, holding their hands together in a giant ring. After about a minute of silence, Kelly could barely hear children's voices whispering simultaneously. This is what she heard. "Ring around, dear Alice, her heart is filled with malice. Alice, Alice, she soon shall die." Kelly was disturbed by the horrific rhyme. The video suddenly cut off with loud static. Kelly gasped and held her hand to her chest. She thought it would be wise to stop watching the movie, but she felt that she just had to know what was on the rest of the tape. As the movie came back on, the scene where Alice meets the blue caterpillar, Kelly sat herself up and continued watching. The video continued playing normally until it got to the Mad Tea Party. Before the Mad Hatter and March Hare could sing A Very Merry Birthday, the video jumped to static again. Kelly felt a lump forming in her throat. There was sound this time, but the image was distorted and hard to distinguish. Kelly could hear a little girl's voice. "Mommy, I'm not lying. There's a monster that hides in my room. I can't sleep because it watches me at night. Please, you have to believe me." She seemed very upset, almost to the point of tears. "I'm sick of hearing this," her mother said angrily. "You're 8 years old. There are no such thing as monsters, and you should know better." "But Mommy..." "That's it! I've had enough!" her mother screamed at the top of her lungs. Kelly could hear the girl sobbing softly as the mother stomped her feet. Suddenly, the picture shook violently and became clear. The video was of the little girl sitting in a chair, staring at the floor. She had tears rolling down her face and looked as though she had been beaten. Bruises covered her arm and face. "Mommy, what are you doing?" At this time, the girl looked very worried, dreading what her mother was about to do. In a few moments, her mother walked toward her, her head cut off by the edge of the screen. In her hand was a small knife. Kelly's heart pounding in her chest, but she couldn't take her eyes off the screen. The girl's mother took the knife in one hand, grabbed the girl's cheeks, and forced her to stick out her tongue. "I'm gonna scrape those lies off your tongue." With that, she placed the sharp edge of the knife onto the girl's mouth and quickly scraped it across her tongue. The girl screamed in agonizing pain. Kelly could see slivers of bloody tongue fall onto the floor. She suddenly felt nauseous. She got up, ran to the kitchen sink, and vomited. As Kelly washed out her mouth, the video went to a piercing static, making her scream. She slowly crept back to the couch, keeping her eyes glued on the screen. The movie came back to Alice walking away from the tea party disgruntled with the Mad Hatter and March Hare. However bad the video segments were, Kelly felt she had to find out who was filming these terrible things happening to this little girl. The movie got to the scene with Alice getting lost in the Tulgey Wood. Again, the screen filled with static. It only lasted a few seconds before cutting to a video of the girl sitting in the front of her bed, crying into her hands. The room she was in was very dark. Everything behind her was cast in shadow. For nearly 3 minutes, she just sat there, crying. Not once did she look up. Every few seconds, she would stop and say, "Nobody loves me." After a while, a door opened off camera, letting a dim light enter the room. Slowly, a shadowed figure entered the room and floated towards the girl. She looked up at the figure. Her Her eyes shot wide open. She began to plead, "No, please!" Her cries were abruptly severed by the deafening static. Kelly screamed out loud and covered her eyes. After the static died down, she gained the courage to open her eyes. The movie came back on with Alice going to the Queen of Hearts courtyard. All the bright colors and silly moments of the film could not stir Kelly out of her deep-seated fear. Kelly began to gain hope that the hellish video segments were over and she could watch the rest of the movie in peace. As the trail scene approached, the picture gradually faded to static. Kelly's heart dropped and she started sobbing. This time, the static lasted over 2 minutes. Kelly's heart raced in anticipation of the upcoming video. When the static disappeared, there was nothing. The living room was filled with a deafening silence. Kelly became short of breath and started hyperventilating. For several seconds, there was complete silence. Kelly thought the video stopped itself, but the tracker on the VCR said the tape was still playing. After a short while, Kelly could hear something. It sounded like children whispering. She could not make out what they were saying. Kelly panicked when she noticed a dark picture slowly developing on the screen. The only thing on the screen was a still image. It was a photo of the little girl sitting on the edge of the bed again, secluded in darkness. This time, she was not crying. She was staring straight at Kelly through the screen. Her eyes were bloodshot from so much crying. The look on her face was a pure horror, her eyes shouting, "Help me!" The only light in the girl's bedroom seemed to be coming from the glow of Kelly's television. The image was so clear that they could have easily been sitting in the same room. Kelly could hear the little girl crying again. However, she was still glaring at her through the screen, not moving an inch. As Kelly looked past the girl's shoulder, she made out what appeared to be a faint set of crooked teeth fixed in a smile. The teeth appeared to be human, but were elongated and stretched out too wide to be from an actual person's mouth. Voices joined like a maddening chorus. Voices of all kinds could be heard whispering, "Off with her head." Over the next minute, the little girl's crying and the voices grew louder and more hysterical. Kelly had to cover her ears. Suddenly, everything fell silent. Her heart pounded as she uncovered her ears. One final deep voice said menacingly, "Off with her head." Static flashed over the image. For a fraction of a second, the picture began to move. The little girl's head slowly fell forward, as if she was going to cry again. It drooped lower and lower until it rolled right off her shoulders and onto the floor. The instant her head fell off, her blood-curdling scream filled the room as Kelly covered her ears in terror. She screamed as loud as she could until the video cut to static one last time and the ending credits of the movie started rolling. Kelly could not speak. She was traumatized as she stared at the blank screen. By this time, it was 5:15 p.m. As Kelly slowly started to get up, she kept her eyes on the screen to make sure nothing else was going to show up on it. Her concentration was broken by the sound of her doorbell ringing. She screamed and shot her head around to see her front door. "Just breathe, Kelly. You're all right. Everything's okay. Just relax." Kelly collected herself, turned on the lights, then headed for the door. It's just an early trick-or-treater. Before opening the door, something told her to look through the peephole first. When she did, what she saw froze her. On her doorstep was a little girl with her head down. She was wearing an Alice dress. "Calm down, Kelly. You're just a little freaked out from the movie. It's only a kid in an Alice costume." She grabbed the candy bowl and opened her front door. When she got ready to hand out the candy, she dropped the candy bowl in horror. The little girl had vanished. Kelly trembled terribly as she picked up the candy, put it all back into the bowl, and slammed the door behind her. "You have to relax. You're just seeing things." When she put the bowl down on the kitchen table, the television cut to a loud static. Kelly screamed and turned towards the living room. Tears rolled down her face. Written on the wall above the television in blood were the words, "Off with your head." Kelly frantically tried to get out the front door, but the door was locked. Suddenly, she could hear something clawing at the door violently like a bear. She looked through the peephole again. She saw nothing but black. As if a fuse broke, all the lights in her house went out at once. She was submerged in total darkness. She could see absolutely nothing, except at the end of the narrow hallway, there was something near her bedroom door. It was a faint set of gnarled teeth fixed in a smile. Kelly was paralyzed with fear. Who's there? The smile slowly floated towards Kelly. She tried to run away but found herself unable to move. In a moment, the shadow monster was right in her face. She could smell the horrible stench of rotting flesh on its breath. It whispered to her, "Off with your head." Later, that same night, a girl by the name of Abby Lawrence had just finished trick-or-treating in her fairy costume. She was 10, and her mother let her go by herself with her friends for the first time. She and her mother lived about a block away from Kelly. When she returned home, her mother gave her a big hug and helped her get ready for bed. "Did you have fun trick-or-treating with your friends, Abby?" "Yeah, my bag is full of candy. It'll probably last me until next Halloween," said Abby. "I'm glad you had fun, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom, you've got to see this." Abby ran to her bag of Halloween candy and pulled out a copy of Disney's Alice in Wonderland on VHS. "Where did you get that?" her mother asked. "One of the houses I went to had a candy bowl. The bowl was empty, but the movie was in it." She could barely control her excitement. "Can we watch it tonight? Pretty please?" Day 3. I was resigned to even writing this journal, and for the first 2 days I kept my will strong. But even the strongest of minds cannot defeat the allure of distraction from staring at the wall of a cell. This journal entry will probably be the longest of them all. There's a lot to explain about the predicament I find myself in, and the hellhole that I now seem to be imprisoned in for the foreseeable future. To start, I should let you know who I am. I used to be a lawyer, a well-off, respectable lawyer, with a family, a 3-story house. Everything a typical American would dream of having. Now, it doesn't matter. Not a single fucking thing I had changes what's happening now. As I type this, I'm sitting on my metal chair, in my cramped metal cell. Everything around me is metal, save the soft mattress. You'd be surprised how grateful a person can be. You get taken from your home, locked in this fucking cell, but hey, we have soft mattresses. I guess that's just the cruel humor of the world. Anyway, getting on with it, the rest of the cell is just a dull metal. However, every wall has a hole in the center, roughly 3 feet above the floor, about wide enough to stick your head through. Through these, we, the prisoners, can communicate. This is the only human interaction we have anymore. The strangest part? Well, no one knows what to make of it. I've been here for 3 days, by my count. Every 24 hours, our cells move. We are shuffled, with new people, through each hole. No one has any idea how. An automated system is my best bet. The only support I have for my idea is that our food is delivered through a hole in the ceiling, which I assume is mechanical. One of my neighbors theorized that this is hell. Another said that we're being trapped by aliens and harvested for slaves once our wills broke.
Everyone has a different story. I'm trying to find out more about what's going on here, why we're all imprisoned, if we are connected, the reasoning behind all of this. With every switch, I'm gathering more information, spreading it, listening to the cell rumors, trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe, and hopefully, I could see my family again. Day 4. I woke today to the sounds of my new cellies. This is a weird batch. The alien rumor seems to have taken a hold and spread through the cells. There's one person that interests me so far more than others. He claims to have been here for over a year. The man claims to have lost track. I wouldn't blame him. Nothing can scratch these walls. Nothing we can do to mark the time. This information means that there's no telling how long this has been going on, or how long we're going to be trapped. The man, he seems to be nothing more than a shell. I barely got him to tell me how long he'd been in. I'd heard from one of the first set of cellies I had that suicide was becoming a common occurrence within the cells. I wonder if I'll ever see the man again, or if today will be one of his last. Day 6. Oh, the fucking smell. Lady fucking luck landed me next to the first suicider I've seen so far. I can't tell what even happened. The body is so decomposed. It must have been in here for months. No telling how long before that. It looks like it had its skull bashed in. I can't see through the hole, but I assume one of the walls is covered with blood. It's probably pointless to hope, but I pray to whatever the fuck is out there that something will clean that mess up. I feel as though I'm getting sick. I can't do this anymore. Day 7. The next switch has given me the most interesting rumor yet. A group of people called the Skinners are the subject of this rumor. It's an interesting story. All but one of my cellies knew of this rumor. There's a supposed group of people who have managed to wriggle through the holes. They have become deformed, deranged descendants of human beings. The rumor varies, however. 2 of the cellies say there is one Skinner. The other talks of many different ones. The one thing that the rumor agrees on are the amount of fucked up these things are. Skinners are an abomination, in the best sense of the word. It makes me laugh to think that even in the worst of conditions, people are believing in something as ridiculous as the Skinners. Day 8. Today brings in less crazy talk. No one in the cells next to me have heard of the Skinners. We all had a good laugh about the insanity of the whole thing. The irony of it all, laughing at other people's insanity while we're trapped in metal cells. On a different note, some of us have been theorizing that it's near Thanksgiving. We were all given a turkey leg for dinner. It's only been a short time since I've ate meat compared to some others, but I still feel as though it's been an eternity, and then that over again. Maybe our captors are going to let us out soon. Maybe this nightmare will finally come to an end. Day 13. There hasn't been anything to record lately. The days get longer. Each minute stretches out impossibly long. Each hour seems like a lifetime. I haven't gotten a fucking step closer. Everyone in here comes from all walks of life. The homeless, the rich, the do-gooders, and the ne'er-do-wells of the world are here. I haven't gotten past square fucking one. There are no connections. There's no pattern, no sense. We're all fucked in here. I've had an epiphany. The key to surviving in this shithole is to accept the fact that there is no hope. Day 16. There's a new rumor. One I find somewhat funny. A baby. 2 horny bastards found each other and fucked through the hole. I knew that this had to be going on. women and men alike giving out all kinds of sex possible through the holes, but this slut managed to get pregnant. The best part? I know it's not a rumor. I could hear the baby cry. It's far, far off. I'll probably never see it, and I don't want to. It's annoying as shit. It must be a lot worse than those directly next to it. Personally, and don't judge me on this, I'd strangle the fucker with its umbilical cord. This is no place for life. This is where the reigning king is death. Day 17. There's something strange. An empty cell. Lots of blood. The walls are nearly covered in it. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe a suicider that finally got cleaned out of his cell? The possibilities are endless. I can't help but let my mind envision the worst scenario. What if Skinners existed? I feel like I've been transported back to my childhood. The nights under the blankets with the Scooby-Doo flashlight, praying a ghost wouldn't rip off the covers and take me right then and there. Day 21. I haven't slept well lately. My mind keeps on going back to the empty cells, thoughts of the Skinners. My fellow cellies have been telling me more of the stories of Skinners. I finally found someone who knew the story of their origin. You see, the very first Skinner starved himself until he was nearly bone. He then, well, the story is despicable. He rubbed his body against the edges of the hole until the skin was rubbed off his shoulders and hips, leaving bloody patches that lubricated his way through the hole. It seems as though he raped a woman. That woman's child was mutated and, unnatural. Mutation shouldn't occur at this rate, especially just from flesh wounds. Although, nothing about this is natural. I can almost come to believe it. Now that I'm typing it, getting it out of my head, it seems a little surreal. But all this does, too. I can't believe what's going on here. I don't know how much I can take of it. Day 23. Another fucking empty cell. This one was worse. I can't tell what's going on. The cell walls might have well been painted red. They were stained, every inch caked in dried blood. I don't know what's happened here. I can't bear to imagine the possibilities. My cellies, all of them, they've stopped talking. The switches still take place, but no one talks, and nor do I. No one has anything to say. I can't take the silence. I can't take this anymore. The prospect of being a suicider seems much more enticing than I ever thought imaginable. Day 24. These empty cells. There's 2 of them this time. What's going on in them? Why are they empty? There's no way one human has that much blood. 6 quarts? That must have taken several bodies, all dragged through the hole. I can no longer sleep. The fucking Skinners must be real. They have to be. How could this have happened? How could there be something so evil, such an abomination existing? It's against the nature of God. I don't even know if God exists anymore. Day 25. I saw a flash in the hole. A red, slimy flash. And then there were droplets of blood in my room. Now I have proof. They're fucking real. I need to find a weapon. I need something to defend myself. When that fucker comes back, I'm gonna send him back to wherever the hell it came from. Day 26. I haven't slept in 2 days. I have no weapons. If it attacks, I can't defend myself. I can't end up like those fucking rooms. My cell will be clean. There's more blood. This time it's coating the hole to the left of my bed. I didn't think it was real at first, but it's there. I know it is. Oh, I'm gonna die here. I can hear the Skinners skitter and scratch, screech, and scramble all across the floors. I know they're coming for me. I haven't seen a human in 2 days. They're turning. They're dying or turning. I don't know which. I can't take it. There. It's happening. The noises. The inhuman screeches. I have to do something. Day, I don't know. I can't do it. These little shits thought they'd beat me. As fucking if. You can't beat me. I'm the fucking god of these cells. As far as I know, I'm the only human left. The last man standing. The man under cover. Behind enemy lines. They aren't gonna fucking kill me. No one kills me. I'll end these motherfuckers. I hear the skittering. They're in the walls. Oh, I'll bash them out. They left by themselves. I can't win. It's hopeless. There's only one exit. They won't take the one thing I still have left. My life is mine to take. Human imprisonment behavior. Test subject 5799. Subject became volatile quickly. Patient's mind collapsed. Signs of multiple personalities emerged. Evidence of self-harm via head bashing. Coincides with the trend seen by other cellmates. The rumor started by our select subject, codenamed the Skinners, became the object of subject 5799's obsession. This led to the subject to self-termination after 33 days, 6 hours, and 27 minutes.
There are certain doors that should never be opened. Doors that lead to places you would never wish to go. Doors that, once opened, you cannot shut. I opened one such door, and there's not a minute, no, not a second of my life that I don't wish I had not. Looking back to that night, I still have no idea what drove me to do it. It wasn't youthful exuberance. I had outgrown that. It wasn't desperation. I was happily married with a child on the way. I think it may have been simply down to the two most dangerous words in the English language. What if? Or maybe it was just out of my control from the start. If Hannah hadn't been late, it would all have been different. I was due to meet her at the station and walk with her back here, over the fields. She had said she wanted me to hold her hand, make sure she didn't lose her footing, her being with the child and all. But between you and me, I think she was more scared of the things that go bump in the night, as she called them. I used to tease her about that, and it always made me laugh. How someone so smart, so confident and worldly wise could be afraid of such things. I certainly don't laugh about that now. Anyway, her train was running late. Killing time, I wandered around the streets near the station and was attracted to one solitary light in the otherwise dark neighborhood. The light was coming from a bookstore, set back slightly from the sidewalk. The paint above the window cracked and was too faded to read. I pushed the door and went inside, and was greeted by the odor of cracked leather, aging parchment, and the hundreds, thousands of fingers that had pored over and turned the pages inside. A man, dressed curiously, as if he had stepped out of one of the pages of the books himself, sat in a rocking chair in the corner, a black cat on his lap, and a black, shapeless hat on his head. All 4 eyes watched my entrance, halting my step. I tried to smile and opened my mouth to say good evening, but no sound would come out, and the smile went no further than my initial thought. After 2, 3, maybe 4 seconds, where I found I could go no further into the shop, caught in the doorway, he doffed his hat, bade me welcome, and asked me to browse at my leisure. He said he was confident I'd find something that took my fancy. I had been in half a mind to go straight back out, but partly out of politeness and partly due to me not wanting to be like Hannah, afraid of my own shadow, I went in and proceeded to absent-mindedly scan the shelves. Each one was crammed with books of all shapes, sizes, and colors, many written in languages I had never seen before or since. I was about to turn around and leave, sure that Hannah would be here by now, wondering where I had got to, when my eyes fell on a book slightly sticking out from its neighbors on the shelf. I can't say why I took any interest in it. It was, if anything, plainer than the others around it. Its cover was of a dark brown leather, with just the image of an eye, shaped rather like that of a cat on its spine. An image I saw was repeated on the front when I slid it from the shelf. I thought you would find something that caught your eye. The owner was behind me. Despite his age, he had left his chair and come up behind me without me being aware. How much? I stammered. It's already yours. I don't want your money. He held my gaze for a couple of seconds, then turned around and went to the back of the shop, busying himself with a pile of books that lay on a small, round table. Like a fool, I stood there, not knowing what to do. Then, I saw Hannah through the window, her face framed by the scarf I had bought her just 2 weeks before, pressed against the window peering in. As if released from a spell, I put the book in my overcoat pocket and narrowly, avoiding kicking the cat, which had moved between me and the door, left the shop, never being more happy to give my wife a hug. Ashamed and surprised in equal measures at the thumping in my chest. It was 2 weeks before I opened the book. Hannah had not been well all day and had gone to bed shortly after dinner. There was what had the markings of a storm outside, the wind rattling the windows in ever-increasing gusts, rain driving against the panes. I poured a glass of nice red wine, got the fire roaring in the grate, and settled down to see if the book could possibly be as strange as the place I'd bought it. To be honest, I'd kind of forgotten about the shop and the book. With your first child on the way, there are always 1,000,001 things to do, and this was the first time I'd had an evening to do, well, nothing. I sat in my favorite armchair, the book on my lap. The eye on the cover was slightly raised, and it seemed to hold my gaze. No, more than that. To stare through me, to stare into me. I started to feel the same unnerving sensation I had experienced back in the shop, and found myself, when I managed to look away from the eye, looking nervously around the, up until then, so familiar room. And oh, how I wish I'd thrown that book into the fire. How I wish that with every fiber of my body, every minute of every day. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the book. The old leather that bound the book was stiff with age, and it needed a little effort to open, creaking slightly. My first thought was that it was written in a language I did not understand, but then the words seemed to swim before my eyes, and I was able to read it. And I read it. Every word. After a while, I don't know how long, I realized I was reading aloud, something I hadn't done since junior school. I have no idea what I was reading. It was like some poem or words jumbling into other apparently random words, but I couldn't stop. They spilled out of me like blood from a severed artery, gushing from my mouth, filling the room around me. The wind and rain on the windows no longer sounded like that of a storm, but a people desperately clawing at the glass, not trying to get in, but to escape from something, from somewhere else. The shadows from the fire merged and danced on the walls, gyrating and fornicating figures, murderous and monstrous shapes. The wine in my glass was no longer a Merlot, but the thick, ruby, warm, cloying texture of blood. I woke the next morning. The fire was out, the book closed on my lap, the wine glass smashed on the floor by my slippered feet. Outside, the storm had died down, just a slight breeze troubling the leaves that had been torn from their branches in the night. But there was something else. 5 years before, I had carried my wife over the threshold of that house, our home. In 2 months' time, I had been looking forward to doing the same with our first child. The previous night, I had brought something else into the house. Our child was born 2 weeks later. Hannah felt it kicking, and to use her words, clawing at her in the early hours. I rushed downstairs to call for Dr. Howard, but I'd only got halfway down when my wife's screams made me run back into the bedroom. I was just in time to see the birth, if that's what you can call it. That child, that thing, crawled out of my wife, its mother. It sat on the end of the bed between Hannah's feet, hissing. Its small body covered in hair, matted from the blood and fluid from the birth. We both just stared at it as it hissed at us, then started to chew on the cord that had joined it to its mother. That was 5 years ago. I can now talk about that without breaking down. Well, what happened later, what I had to do, well, I can't talk about that. Not yet. Maybe never. There's a small pile of stones next to the birch tree that marks the place we buried her. Hannah has a no less fitting but better grave in the churchyard. Her mind went first. It couldn't cope with what had happened, what was happening. After her mind broke, her body soon followed. Everything she ate, her body seemed to gained no goodness from it. When I carried her to her bed for the last time, she weighed no more than a pile of rags. I don't know why I have managed to carry on. No, that's a lie. I know exactly why I've been allowed to carry on. I'm the carrier. I have the book. It is my role to pass it on, to give it to someone else, another body, soul, for it to infect and destroy. For 5 years I have resisted, fought against it, despite the horrors that accompany me every day. The images that are there whenever I close my eyes, the voices trickling obscene, vengeful, and hysterical thoughts, prophecies, and threats into my ears. For 5 years, I have held on, but I'm getting weaker. Once I was sure I would never subject anyone else to what I and my family have been through, that I would never pass it on, would take the pain and endure the horrors and suffer the torment that I had brought upon myself. But now, I am not so sure. My life seemed like it was going pretty well. I had just received my bachelor's degree at the state college and received a fairly well-paying job as an office manager. The thing is, something felt like it was missing from my life. I wanted love. I wanted to have a wife to keep me company, but the only woman I knew worked at the office and were drop-dead ugly. After coming home one evening from a long day at work, I grabbed a Coke, sat down, and booted up my computer. I was very desperate to find love as soon as possible, and it seemed my only choice to find it was through online dating. I visited a popular website, registered, and set up my interests in the hopes that I'd be matched soon. The next morning, I woke up and turned the computer on once more. I noticed that there was only a total of 2 matches, and, strangely enough, one of the 2 was just a coworker. The other had no profile picture, but the name was unfamiliar. Knowing how desperate I was, I took a chance and private messaged this girl, asking her to meet up at a local cafe that night. The person replied back about 3 minutes later, saying okay. I was very excited, but at the same time anxious to see how this would go. That night, I was bitterly exhausted from the tremendous amount of work I had at the office, but my excitement overpowered it as quickly as I got home, changed, and drove off to the cafe. The cafe was only a quick 5 minutes from my house, so driving was no problem at all. I had no trouble finding parking, and soon enough, I was inside, ready to see my blind date. To my utter astonishment, the most beautiful girl I had ever seen in my life approached me. Her most prominent feature were her eyes, the most gorgeous gray eyes in the world. "Hi," she said, smiling. "I'm Christy. You must be David. I saw your picture online." "I sure as heck didn't see yours," I said, and we shared a laugh. I could tell already we were meant to be. Our first date turned out great, and as it turns out, we did indeed have a lot in common. As I dropped her off at her shabby apartment building, we partook in our first kiss, and I left. At this point, I felt like the luckiest guy in the world. Like, nothing could go wrong now. Christy and I dated for only 4 months before I proposed to her, and she said yes with great excitement. Our wedding went like most, but there was a desolate turn of people. The members of the audience included my mother, Christy's father, a couple of my closer coworkers, and a few of their close friends. She was just so wonderful, and I was so in love. That night, I lost my virginity to her, but luckily, she didn't get pregnant, because having a child this early on in our marriage wouldn't be too good. I wasn't financially able to afford a honeymoon, but she thought it was alright, and being with each other was all that mattered. She was just so nice like that. In place of that, I helped her move her things into my humble home, where we would be living together. Our life together was going by so nicely, and we were the perfect team. A few months later, I learned at work that one of my coworkers who attended my wedding, his name is Kevin, was found dead, with cuts all over his body. It was unidentified who did this or what had even happened. They told me they were going to medically examine him in a few days. This news really brought me down, and it made the headache I already had even worse. I had been getting pretty bad headaches, which I presumed had to be from overwork. I got home late at night, and it appeared Christy was already in bed. I wasn't very hungry, so I went up to my room to join her. I immediately told her about my friend Kevin being found dead, but she sat up suddenly, looked at me and smiled, which was quite odd, considering the situation, and said, "Don't worry about it, he'll be fine." I wasn't sure whether to be surprised or relaxed at her tone, but given her sweet nature, I just ignored it and went to sleep. The following morning, I woke up sick, coughing very badly and feeling the urge to vomit. I stayed home from work, which was the only nice part about it, besides the fact that Christy, being so caring for me while I was in my need. "I love you. Feel better," were the relaxing words spoken to me every so often that day. As night fell, she silently joined me in bed and turned off the lights. About 30 minutes in, I was having trouble sleeping. I wrapped my arms around Christy in an attempt to hold her, but just then, my hand froze. I just couldn't move. Her skin was as cold as ice. "Christy, are you all right?" I asked, but she didn't respond. I turned her over to reveal my wife, but the most horrific way I could imagine her. I screamed as loud as I possibly could, shoved her away from me, and bolted for the bathroom. What I saw was my Christy with her eyeballs missing, revealing bloodied sockets, skin, veins covered in droopy and pale white skin. I wasn't sure about any other detail because my eyes were not fully adjusted to the darkness. I just sat there and cried until, I suppose, I fell asleep. Surprisingly, I felt refreshed that morning, but that quickly changed into fear as I remembered what I had just seen. My vision was blurred and distorted, most likely due to my excessive amount of crying. I had to push on and overcome the fears I had about whatever I witnessed the night before. I opened the door slowly, making sure it didn't make a sound. As I slowly turned toward the bedroom, I noticed she wasn't there. I heard something coming from the kitchen, metal banging together. I rushed over to check out the scene, where I saw my beautiful wife there, picking up pans she had dropped. As soon as she saw me, she dropped them again. "What the hell happened last night?" she asked, but she sounded more concerned than angry. "I felt like I had to throw my guts up, and so I did," I lied. She took the bait, fortunately. "Ah, well, feel better." She kissed me and went back to cooking up breakfast. My weekend wasn't starting off so great. I contemplated what I had seen, what had just happened. I just couldn't explain it. I tried to think past it like it would never happen again, but it did. It haunted my dreams, her lifeless body, her lack of eyes. But the worst part of my nightmares were what it did. Her body would just stand up like a marionette and put its face to mine, sending the odor of rotten flesh into my nostrils. "There's no escape," it whispered coldly. "We'll be together forever." It grinned, showing her regular, beautiful smile. That smile now sent shivers down my back. I thought I was losing my mind. I saw that thing everywhere. It was hiding behind a cubicle. It was lying down in the park. I was frantic to get away from it, but it just wouldn't stop. I wanted Christy, my Christy, the one I'm in love with, not that ghoul. I knew I needed it to end. The following day, I walked into my house and saw the body standing near the kitchen, slouched over like in my dreams. I didn't take a minute to think before grabbing it and shoving it into the oven, resisting its struggles. I closed the door, turned it on, and although it was painful, I was relieved. The oven began to shake violently and emitted screams which were so pain-filled and horrible to hear. I ran out of the house. The pain-filled screams went on for another 10 minutes or so. And by then, my house was filled with a thick wall of black smoke. As I walked back in, the shaking and screaming stopped. The house felt dead, silent and eerie, like nothing else was alive in the world. I walked up to the oven to examine the remains, and what I pulled out destroyed me more than anything could have. What I beheld was Christy, my wife, burned beyond return, but strangely, her eyes were completely intact. I fell to my knees, just staring. I couldn't believe this. I was there for 15 minutes, 30, as the police started showing up. They came in and picked me up and, of course, arrested me for being on the scene of the crime. I was put into a room and questioned, but luckily, I was able to get my way around their persisting questions. They concluded that I was a husband who got home from work, finding the charred remains of my once beloved wife. They told me everything was going to be okay, and that I would need to rent a room at a hotel while they inspected. I knew it wasn't going to be alright. I knew what I had done. And you know what's even worse? I still see her. Whatever. I killed her. I killed her. I could never forgive myself. I ruined my life, her life, everyone's life. I didn't want to go on, but here I am typing this, so since I wanted to try to go on through my insane depression, I attempted to go to work the next day. As I pulled in and approached the doors, I noticed that there was a yellow caution tape in front with a small note stuck to the door reading, Building has been condemned from operations until later notice due to chemical exposure creating hazardous working conditions. Signed, State Department of Health. I felt chills run down my spine as I read that note. Not knowing what this would mean to me, I decided I needed to get this checked out. I got into my car and sped down the road straight to my doctor. I neared his office and threw the door open, revealing I was the only client there. A nurse escorted me to him, and I asked him if he could test my blood for chemical intake. He said yes, and agreed to do it. Shortly afterward, he diagnosed me a disorder caused by the inhalation of that certain chemical. Trembling, I pleaded for him to read the side effects included with the inhalation, and he read them to me. Effects of inhalation or ingestion involve migraines, vomiting, weariness, and is uniquely linked to strange patterns and effects occurring within the senses. Long-term exposure may result in brain damage, mental instability, and severe hallucinations. The Forest of Three, that is what it is called. Nobody knows who named it or when. In fact, this secluded area is not labeled on maps. It has no official name, only the name given it to it by the townsfolk who live on its edge, the Forest of Three. Perhaps it is named after the 3 tall redwoods that grow in its heart, 3 towering giants lifting their heads far above the tree line. They stand in a circle with overgrown branches extending into each other's foliage as if linking arms. When the wind howls, one can see them sway, their powerful roots supplying the great forces needed to prevent them from falling. Viewed from the correct angle, it can appear as if they are attempting to dance, to uproot themselves and skip in a circle with hands joined. The 3 redwoods have been left untouched for decades, although the ancient, well-seasoned wood would surely be profitable for the town's lumber industry. Not a single person has ever suggested cutting them down. The redwoods are viewed by the townsfolk as guardians of the forest, as protectors of the town. And a very small town it is. How many inhabitants are there? Nobody knows the exact count, for such details are of little concern, and it could not be more than a few hundred. During daylight hours, the streets are occasionally filled with lively sounds of children playing, running, skipping, shouting, and all other manner of things that children are prone to do. However, the town itself is a rather boring place, and not the preferred playground of children. After all, the town sits next to a large forest. What better playground could a child ask for? Thousands of trees to climb, rocks to overturn, creatures and insects to be examined. A child could spend every day exploring the vast expanse of green and never happen upon the same tree twice. Yes, the forest is a perfect place for children, a place for them to explore, to imagine, to learn. The children love the forest greatly. They even sing a nursery rhyme about it. Skipping in circles with hands joined, children will chant, come play in the forest of three, you with I and I with thee. Oh, such fun time we have in store, lurking there forevermore." Where this rhyme comes from, nobody knows. It is possible that the children themselves wrote it, yet upon examination, this theory seems implausible. Forevermore? Thee? hardly words that a child would understand, let alone include in a song. No, this rhyme speaks of something old, something archaic, something beyond the understanding of children. For many years, life was peaceful in the small town, and nothing noteworthy occurred. There was no newspaper because there was never any news. A simple lumber town with a simple lumber industry, populated by simple people. Everything was as it should be, nothing was out of place. Then, a child disappeared. How long ago was this? Few can remember the exact year. Several decades ago at least. A child whose only concern in life was sweets and playtime simply vanished. A town meeting was called. One of the other children claimed that they had seen the missing child earlier that day, that the missing child had gone into the forest to play as usual and had not come back. A search party was immediately organized and sent into the forest. They searched for hours until the falling darkness did not permit them to search any longer. "We will search again at first light. Everything will be fine. It's probably just a game. Don't worry so much." The townsfolk comforted the child's terrified parents. As soon as the first rays of sunlight crept through their trees, the search party was out again. They covered miles and miles, hardly stopped for rest or food, yet there was no trace of the missing child. Each day they searched, and each day they came back with sore feet, hungry bellies, and no child. Hope was still there, but it was quickly fading. Each day the search party came back sooner and sooner. Each day they spent less and less time looking for the missing child before heading back. Eventually, the searches ceased entirely. If one were to examine the town at that time, at first glance it would appear just as it had before. Men chopped wood, stores had good business, school was in session, children still played in the streets and in the forest. Of course, the family and friends of the missing child grieved, but nothing would seem out of the ordinary at first glance. Look closer and you would see it. The children, they played, they danced, they sang their nursery rhyme, yet there was something odd about their games. As they skipped in circles, arms together, chanting their favorite tune, there was a distinct gap where two children should have been holding hands. They instead held their arms to the side, creating a gap in the circle. A gap that seemed just large enough to make room for another child. During the rainy season, the children often had to play inside. The school had an ample supply of checkerboards, which were excellent at keeping the children's minds engaged. If one looked closely at the children playing checkers, you would notice a single lonely child, whereas all other children had partners to play checkers with. This child was on their own. Nevertheless, they seemed to be having a fine time, making moves for both sides of the board, and even becoming angry when they lost to their imaginary partner. Life in the town continued. The memory of the missing child faded with each year until the other children scarcely remembered them. Soon the children matured and had children of their own. The unfortunate unsolved mystery of the child that went missing was slowly forgotten. That is, until a second child vanished. The adults who remembered the original disappearance were disturbed. The disappearance of another child brought back painful memories. Many of them had been children themselves when their first child went missing, although they remembered very little about that child. Again, a town meeting was called. During the meeting, it surfaced that the child was last seen heading into the forest, eager to play, and again, a search party was formed. This search party fared no better than the one 15 years earlier. Although the forest was searched each day for hours, with many, many miles of land being covered, not a single trace of the child was ever found. Again, the search party was disbanded, leaving the family to grieve their loss. After a while, the town seemed to return to normal. Daily life resumed its normal course. just as it had so many years before. Yet, if one looked closely at the children, you would notice the same curiosities witnessed 15 years before. The children skipped in circles, singing the nursery rhyme that their parents had passed on to them, but again there was a gap in their group, a void that was only apparent when they danced. This gap appeared to be just a little bit larger than the one before. Perhaps there was now room for 2 extra children to join in their happy group. During rainy days when the children were stuck indoors playing with worn-out checker sets, there were no longer any lonely children. Every child had a partner to play with. However, laying unnoticed in the corner of the room, there was a solitary checker set. It had no players, no children to have fun with it. The pieces were scattered across the board as if the game were currently in progress, yet there was nobody using it. Who could say what this meant? Maybe nothing. Children were prone to strange behavior, as any parent knows. A gap in their dancing circle, an unused checkerboard. Why should any of these anomalies be cause for concern? In the end, it did not matter. No adult noticed the slightly unusual behavior of the children after either disappearances. Such was life in the small lumber town. Years continued to pass. Those who were children during the first disappearances became middle-aged. The friends of the second child who disappeared now had children of their own, and life passed by, completely normal, until tonight. For tonight is a very special night. If one were to visit the town center, you would find it bustling with activities. Worried faces, loud arguments, and a weeping family is what you would find. You see, earlier today, a child went into the forest to play and it did not return. A town meeting has been called to discuss the best course of action. Many members of the town remember the initial disappearance, which occurred more than 3 decades ago. Some are saying that disappearances are connected, that 2 disappearances would be coincidence, but not 3. Some now believe that the forest is haunted, while others call them crazy. Early tomorrow morning, when the sun begins to rise, a search party will set out to find the missing child. Perhaps they will find the child, and perhaps not. Perhaps the child simply became lost while playing in the forest and could not find their way back home. Or perhaps tomorrow, when the other children go outside to play and begin dancing in a circle, chanting their nursery rhyme, we will see a gap just large enough for 3 extra children to join. And so, tonight I invite you to visit the Forest of 3. Early tomorrow, the determined search party will undoubtedly break the calm silence, the quiet serenity of the forest, but for the next few hours, all is still. Stroll through the tall, broad redwoods, the thick brush, the moist soil, the trickling creeks. Gaze through the foliage into the night sky to see bright starlight and thin gray wisps of cloud flowing overhead. Eventually, you'll arrive at the heart of the forest. Here stands 3 great redwoods, 100 feet taller and 100 years older than all others in the forest. They stand with their branches interweaved as if dancing in a circle. The wind howls. The trees begin to sway. Sharp shadows are cast upon the trunks of the great redwoods. The shadows move across the bark, and it appears as if the trees are snarling at you, sneering at some great joke that you cannot understand. The wind dies. Close your eyes. Listen for it. The soft rustle of leaves overhead, the quiet trickle of water through streams, the small animals moving through the brush. Now it comes, so very distant, yet so very clear, an innocent chorus, carrying a sinister tone, the voice of the Forest of 3. Come play in the Forest of 3, you with I and I with thee. Oh, such fun we have in store, lurking there forevermore. When I was 15, I found a well in the woods behind my house. We had already lived in that house for a few years by the time I found it, and I was surprised that I had never run across it before. It was made of cold gray stone and jutted out about 3 feet out of the ground. The top had been covered with boards. Dead leaves framed its base and coated the boards almost like a camouflage. I marked the location in my head, making a mental map. I figured it might be cool to find my way back there at some point to read or draw. It was a really peaceful spot. It was summer and I was kind of a loner with little to do. Most of the time, a peaceful spot to be alone was all I wanted. It took me a year before I found the well again. I could swear that I had mapped the path back to it in my head perfectly. It wasn't like it was that far away from my backyard, maybe a mile into the woods, if that. And I spent most of the rest of that summer looking for it. I would walk the tree line for hours back and forth. I didn't even care about using it as a spot to hang out anymore. I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. I asked my parents if they had ever seen it during the times they would go for walks out there. They just shook their heads and told me that they didn't know anything about a well. After a while, I just gave up. It wasn't really worth the wasted energy after all. I figured it was out there somewhere. Perhaps I had just been deeper than I thought the day I found it. Time passed. Another school year came and went, and I had a birthday during that time. Turned 16, started driving. I found a girlfriend at school and I went about my life as normal. The next summer, I found myself bored on a day that my parents had both cars and decided maybe I should take a walk into the woods. I hadn't actually done it for a while, and besides, by that point, I'd started smoking and wanted to keep it as far away from the house as possible to hide it from my parents. About 45 minutes into my walk, I found it. The well. It was in the exact spot I had originally mapped out in my head and long since forgotten. Right there, where I would have expected it to be a year earlier. Still, cold gray stone. Still boarded up. Still covered in dead leaves. I did a double take on it, honestly, wondering how I could have not found it when I was looking for it, but just kind of stumbled across it when I wasn't. I leaned up against one of the trees about 4 yards from it, and I stared at it, totally baffled. I tried to shrug it off, but it was so weird. I pulled out a cigarette and stood smoking and tracing the well with my eyes as if it were some kind of alien species. That's when I heard the whistling. It was soft and low. At first I had to strain a bit to even hear it. I looked around the tree line to see if I could spot anyone else walking around the property. Maybe my mom or dad had come home at some point and were taking a stroll through the trees just like me. I didn't see anyone though. No distant shapes, no figures wandering the tree line. I followed the direction of the sound with my ears as it started to get louder, and I even recognized the tune. Mary had a little lamb. It got louder and louder till it seemed like the source should be right near me, and I soon realized that it was. It was coming from inside the well. I walked over to the well and started to clear the boards off the top. They weren't fastened to the top by anything, so it was just as simple as picking them up and tossing them into the grass. Once the last board was cleared, I stared down into the black pit. A foul stench rose up from below, like wet and rotting vegetation. I trained my ear back towards the whistling once again, just to be sure I wasn't crazy. Sure enough, it was echoing off the stone walls of the well before it reached my ears. "Hello?" I called down. "Are you okay?" The whistling stopped. It just cut off at the sound of my voice. It was followed by a long and empty silence, and it made me feel gradually more uncomfortable with each passing second. I swallowed hard and called out again. "Is somebody down there?" I yelled. My question was once again answered with only silence. "Or am I going crazy?" I said under my breath as I leaned up from the hole and took a drag off my cigarette. Suddenly, sharp and manic laughter exploded from deep within the well. I nearly stumbled backwards from the surprise. I quickly struck my face back down into the top of the well and yelled with all I had, "Who's down there?" Another long pause. I felt like I was standing on the precipice of hell. The stench of rot grew even stronger in my nose. I had to choke down each breath I took. The silence was broken by what sounded like a low whimper, and then a voice that sounded exactly like my mother. "Honey? Is that you?" she said. "Please, you have to help me. I think my legs are broken." My mother had left for work that morning. I watched her drive away. She had called the house before I went out on my walk, in fact, asking if there was anything special I wanted her to pick up from the store on the way home. Whatever was talking to me was not my mother. That much I knew for sure. The imitation was perfect, though. I stood above that well staring down into the black. I was stunned and unsure how to respond to what I had just heard. Then, up from below, came another voice. My father's voice. "Is this how you treat your mother?" he screamed. "Ignoring her pleas for help? You've always been such a rotten little shit. Should have smothered you in your crib. Or fed you to the dogs when you were a baby." I felt sick. Obviously, whatever was down there was trying to mess with my head. As crazy as it seemed, that was the only explanation. Still, even knowing that, hearing those words in my father's voice hit me very hard. I backed away from the well. "Oh God!" it screamed again in my mother's voice. "Help me, please! The rats are eating me!" Its screams for help dissolved into a high-pitched squeal and then died out in a gurgling, retching noise. I turned from the well entirely and began to run away from it, back the way I came and towards my house. I could hear whatever was down in that well behind me, laughing. As I moved through the woods as fast as my feet would carry me, I could still hear it whistling. Long when I should have been out of earshot, I continued to hear it. It whistled, "Mary had a little lamb," just like when I first heard it. But as I reached the edge of the forest, the tune changed to a funeral march. I sprinted to the back door, which I had thankfully left unlocked before I left. I got inside quickly and locked it behind me. I went into my room on the second floor of the house and stared out my window. It overlooked the backyard and had a clear view of the woods beyond. Nothing was chasing me, at least not what I could see. Still, I sat at that window until my parents got home from work. I thought about telling them about what I had heard from the bottom of the well, but I knew they wouldn't have believed me. I ended up keeping it to myself. I never went into those woods again, and every time my parents would go for walks, I'd always tell them to be careful. I knew there wasn't much else I could do. What was I supposed to say? If you run across a well out there, book it, Mom and Dad. That shit is evil. Yeah, I'm sure that would have gone over real well, like me in therapy for a few years well. They never did see it though, or if they did, they never mentioned it. Months later, I started hearing someone whistle the funeral march outside my window every night for a week. Every time I'd look to see what was there, I could never see anything. And this happened every few months.
And when it did, it would drive me crazy. I wouldn't be able to sleep at all. I would just sit up in my bed and listen in terror, helpless to do anything about it. My parents never heard it. Eventually, I moved away from my parents' place out to California. I got a job in the Bay Area working at some tech company. Met myself a nice girl, and I even got married. For a while, I even forgot about the well. That is, until I went on a nature hike with my wife a few weeks ago. We were just walking along in the woods, talking and having a nice weekend with each other. We followed a trail that led us into a clearing, and I froze in my tracks when I saw it. A well, sticking about 4 feet out of the ground, covered in dead leaves. The boards had been removed from the top and scattered about the base, exactly as I had left it. My wife had noticed I had stopped walking with her and turned to me with a puzzled look. "What the hell is wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, smiling and waving back towards me. Did you see it?" I said, pointing a finger towards the well. She turned her head and then turned back to me with a raised eyebrow. "The well?" she said. "Yeah, I see it. So what?" I wanted to tell myself that it was a different well. It had to be, right? I hadn't seen it in over 10 years, and I was in a different fucking state. I knew, though, just by looking at it, that it was the same exact fucking well. I found it again. I found it because I had stopped looking for it. I grabbed my wife by the wrist and started walking the other way. "What the hell are you doing?" she said as I drug her along. "Let's get out of here," I said, and then realizing just how weird I was being, made a quick excuse. "I'm really starting to not feel well." "Okay," she said, still sounding puzzled, but placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. About halfway back down the trail, I heard whistling. The same tune I heard the first time I looked down that damn well. I looked back behind me, half expecting to see some nightmare bearing down on me like something out of a horror movie. Instead, I just saw my wife, whistling "Mary Had a Little Lamb," and smiling as she walked.
October 15th, 2018 was the best and worst day of my life. It was the best day of my life because my wife had given birth to a beautiful baby boy. It was the worst day of my life because my wife went into a self-induced coma, resulting from excessive blood loss. I took my new son Sam home that day and left my sick wife at the hospital. I was filled with just so much sadness, yet so much love all the same time. Every night, I put my baby boy to sleep, and I was filled with absolute peace and joy. I'd never seen a baby sleep so soundly as my son did. Every night I wish I could hold my wife as we watched our son dream the night away. I wanted so badly to retain these wonderful images I had of Sam, and I knew my wife would want them too. I knew I had to do something. My next door neighbor and his wife gave birth to a little girl named Cindy 2 years prior. I remember them showing me a scrapbook filled with gorgeous sketches of animals, candies, toys, and things of that sort. The sketches were created by a machine called Dream Sketch. The machine worked like a polygraph device, except it sketched whatever a person or child was dreaming of at that given time. I knew, right then and there, that I had found the answer I was looking for. When I brought the machine home, it came complete with a moderately sized sketching machine that came with a stack of paper, extra ink, and 2 small wireless sensors, that were to be placed on the right and left sides of the head of the dreamer. Later that night, I cradled my young son to sleep. I then put the 2 small sensors on both sides of Sam's head and turned on the machine. The machine buzzed softly on into the night. I stayed in Sam's room for nearly an hour before I went to bed, periodically watching the dream sketch in my watching son sleep. I stayed in Sam's room for nearly an hour before I went to bed, periodically watching the dream sketch and watching Sam sleep. I was excited as a kid before Christmas, waiting to see what my son would dream up. When I woke the next morning, I went into Sam's room to wake him up. Sam laid calmly in his crib as he stared at me, smiling. Just as I was going to pick up Sam, I remembered the dream sketch. A single piece of paper lay on the floor next to the dream sketch. As I picked up the sheet of paper, I could clearly see it was a drawing of my wife laying in her hospital bed, fast asleep. Strange that such an image would be made from a newborn child, but there was something else that was odd about this drawing, something that I couldn't quite figure out. It was then that I received the phone call. I don't recall who it was that gave me the news that day. It could have been man or a woman for all I know. But what I do know for sure are the words that were spoken to me. Your wife is dead. It was then I knew what was odd about the sketch in my hand. My wife's electrocardiogram was flatlined. With tears in my eyes and a lump in my throat, there laid Sam calmly on his back, still staring at me, still smiling. I returned the dream sketch back to the store I bought it from and screamed at the employee who sold it to me. The employee did their best to explain to me that they had no control over what the dream sketch draws. That, of course, is all up to the person the dream sketch is hooked up to. The employee apologized profusely for the inconvenience, but I was inconsolable at that point. I was in a complete daze from the shock of my dead wife, and the knowledge that her death was foretold. Who it was foretold by was the real question at hand. Was it a mistake? Did the dream sketch have a malfunction of some sort? Was there no malfunction at all? Or was it my baby's son that indeed dreamt of the death of my poor departed wife? There was only one way to know for sure, and the answer terrified me. I left the store with the new dream sketch and waited anxiously for nightfall. It was difficult for me to rock Sam to sleep that night. He kept staring at me and smiling that damn smile of his. Eventually, he fell asleep and slept soundly while I frantically opened the box to the dream sketch and put all the necessary pieces in order. Once I connected the sensors to the right and left sides of Sam's head, I sat there in Sam's room, quietly, in the dark. I listened to the quiet hum of the dream sketch and waited for the drawing needles to start sketching something. My heartbeat increased with every minute that the night consumed, and still I watched the drawing needles. Bags under my eyes started to form as the moon shifted its position in the sky. My heartbeat began to decrease as I tried desperately hard to stay awake and watch the drawing needles. The machine continued to hum throughout the night as I fell asleep in my rocking chair, rocking myself into a deep sleep. I woke up in a sweat as I could feel Sam's eyes staring into my subconscious. I locked eyes with my son as he continued to smile that same damn smile, and I was frowning my same damn frown. I then looked down at the dream sketch and noticed another single sheet of paper lying down on the floor below. I dropped to my knees and crawled over to the paper, frightened as a child in the dark. I wanted nothing more than to crumple the paper up and burn it and never know what was drawn on it. But I couldn't. I had to know what was on the paper. I had to know who foretold my wife's death. I, reluctantly, looked at the paper and held my breath at the gruesome sight that lay before me. I looked on at the sheet of paper that had a drawing of a lunatic of a man carrying a bloody shotgun in one hand and a sheet of paper in the other. 2 gory bodies lay on the floor below him. One of the bodies was of a young woman in her mid-20s. The other body was of a little girl, lying down dead next to a dream sketch. I recognized these people. I recognized that lunatic of a man. Oh, God help me. I knew who these people were. I looked out the window toward my next-door neighbor's house and saw fire trucks and cop cars and several ambulances. When I walked outside, I spoke with one of the police officers on my neighbor's lawn. He told me that my neighbor used his dream sketch on his wife. When my neighbor woke up and looked on at the sheet of paper that his dream sketch produced, it was of his wife having sex with another man in a room as his daughter Cindy lay in a basket being carried by a stork. The officer told me that my neighbor had gone insane and murdered his wife and daughter with a shotgun. After completing the heinous act, my neighbor put both barrels of the shotgun into his mouth and fired. It was clear to me then that my newborn son was the master of evil. But how? How could a baby know such terror? How could a baby foresee evil things to come? Could he in fact be an evil being? Or could he just see things to come, and these things just so happen to be the forces of evil? No. How could one see such evil, such terror, such brutality, and sleep so soundly at night? I knew then what must be done. I knew then that Sam, my baby boy, had to die. I stampeded up the stairs in a rage toward my child's bedroom. Blood pumped through my veins like never before as I was prepared to do the unthinkable. I swung open Sam's door so ferociously that it made a gaping hole when I slammed it against the wall. I expected to hear Sam cry from the loud crash, but only silence was heard. When I approached the crib, Sam was fast asleep. He slept as calmly and sweetly as ever before, but I knew what he was. I knew the true evil that lurked behind those eyes that stared at me so deeply, and that mouth that smiled, that damn smile. I can admit at this point, I had gone completely mad. I wanted Sam to wake up. I wanted him to see what I was about to do to him. I wanted him to show me that damn smile one last time as I choked the life from his wretched little body. I grabbed my son's throat and I squeezed. I squeezed until all the blood in my body had gone to my head. Blood pulsated through my veins as I squeezed. I was squeezing so hard that I hadn't breathed a breath of air for nearly a minute, and I almost passed out. I collapsed to the ground afterwards, after I killed my only son. I cried for a while. I cried and pleaded to God and asked him if I did the right thing. It was then that I noticed a sheet of paper next to the dream sketch. I picked up the single sheet of paper and held it to my face. It was a drawing of me strangling my baby son in his crib. Oh God, I killed my son. I killed Sam. I never knew whether or not Sam could see the evil things to come, or if he made these evil things happen. But I did what I did. And I would do it again today. Confession statement made by Vincent Marshall regarding the murder of Samuel Marshall. Confession taken at Los Angeles County Police Department on December the 21st, 2018 at approximately 5:55 p.m.
Have you ever wondered why, when you were alone in a room, you never really felt alone? Or why children have imaginary friends who don't always seem to be imaginary? I'm sure any typical scientific explanation is floating around somewhere, but is it always the truth? A simple comforting cover-up for what is actually there. I was 13 when the visions began. I thought maybe I just wasn't getting enough sleep, or possible stress from school. You know, coming from a dysfunctional family and long hours of school add up. After the months that followed my 13th birthday, I began to hear voices, and to be followed by things of dark nature. I never stopped to question it. That was until my next birthday. My grandmother sat me down and told me of the family lineage that would make me understand the things that I saw and heard, but never understood. A gift, if that is what you would call it. A gift that was passed on through my family that I had regrettably gotten. She had long since passed, leaving me alone with this curse I had received through birth. I had always felt comfortable in my home. It was a small house, of course, 2-bedroom, and a large master bedroom that took up the whole upper floor. But it was different at night. I was occasionally woken up in the middle of the night by the urge of having to relieve myself. You have to understand that our house was rather old. Some of the door handles on our doors were no longer there, and the bathroom was no different. As I sat there, going about my business, the door would slowly open until I spoke out. "I'm in here." Then, it would simply stop opening. I pushed aside the experience, thinking maybe it was just the airflow or something. I was young, and still didn't completely grasp the concept of truth. Another incident was the tall man. I would sleep facing the wall since my bed was set up against it, and from time to time, there would be a tall shadow that would linger on my wall. Now, I never felt threatened by it, but it was strange. He never said anything. He would just stand there while I tried to sleep. None of my visions would bother me. That was until I moved into the new house. The new house I was soon to move into was much larger than my old one. It was charming and friendly. My parents had bought it off an old friend of theirs who was selling it because she and her husband had divorced, and she was moving out to California. Before we could move in, my parents remodeled it, and 6 months had passed and we were finally able to move into it. The first night was quiet and peaceful. My parents ordered takeout since we hadn't gotten in all of our appliances yet. We were fully settled in a few weeks after our move, though. And, for the first time in a long time, I hadn't seen or heard a thing. Maybe moving here wasn't such a bad idea. Around the time of my move, I had graduated on into high school. I'd always thought to myself, what could be scarier than high school? I never imagined I would soon find something worse. Months after the move, I slept restlessly. The few hours I did get would leave me groggy in the morning. I was tired. I struggled to keep up with the routine I was forcing myself into. Get up, go to school, survive the day, and then go home. Anything in between, I wouldn't bother to remember, not because it wasn't important, but because I really didn't remember. At the age of 15, I had gotten my first job at a local food joint. My parents' relationship had basically deteriorated after the move. 20 years of being together, and 10 of them being married. They finally split and got a divorce, but they remained living together for, the sake of the family. But it didn't stop them from arguing, or the drinking for that matter. Neither of them had worked since we moved here, so I got a job to feed the family. I worked double shifts when I could, and the money wasn't much, but it was a lot better than nothing. We were burning through what was saved up in the bank, and it wouldn't last forever. Every night, I would pass out in my bed for the few hours of sleep I could get, only to be woken up a few hours into the night and not be able to fall back asleep. The feeling of the room would keep me awake. It was, I guess unsettling. Like being watched carefully by a hunter seeking its prey. In the morning, I would find what was clean and wear it, and at breakfast, I would try to complete my homework for school so I could pass the classes. And at the same time, I was overlooking my work schedule for the week to come. Since I had gotten my job, school had seemed to drag out even more so than it once did. I would sit in class and try not to drift off. While trying to keep my head up, I would stare out the window, and sometimes I could have sworn I would see a man standing outside. When I turned 16, I picked up another job just so that we could keep our electricity and water on. At night, I didn't bother to sleep. I would just lay in bed with my light off, listening to the still movements through the thin walls of my room. I was used to hearing the footsteps around my house. It didn't bother me, but what did was what was in my room itself. When I did manage to fall into sleep, it wouldn't be for long. I'd be in between awake and asleep and feel this thing standing over me. I felt, if I fell asleep, that I wouldn't wake up. My body would jolt up and shake, and I'd look around my room to find nothing here. And this continued until I actually dared to fall asleep. And nightmares greeted me and tortured me until I woke up. At this point, I began to tell my parents of my experiences, but they just pushed it off as teenage drama. I had stopped telling them about it after that, but things got worse. I would wake up to the feeling of being choked or just unable to move my body. I would run upstairs once whatever was there released me. The nights I could sleep, I'd wake up in pain the next morning with scratches on my body, or even bruises that looked like I had been bitten. No matter what I had said or shown to my parents, no one seemed to believe me. I was alone in all this. I was suffering, and no one seemed to even notice or even care. Days I would come home from school, my room wouldn't be how I left it. Things would go missing, or when I tried to sleep at night, things would get thrown around. I tried sleeping upstairs only to get yelled at by my parents, and when I tried to explain why, they would just get madder and call me a liar. One night, I had finally gotten fed up with it and challenged it to show itself. If it wanted to torment me, at least do it without hiding like a coward. A few nights after things were quiet, I was worn out from a double shift I had pulled that night, and I was lying in bed, facing my wall on my side. That was until I heard a soft giggle. I squeezed my eyes shut even more, not daring to look at what stood near. At least, I was until it spoke. "Good night, Mommy." I turned over to see a small child standing a few feet from my bed. He was staring straight at me, a small smile on his face. He seemed out of place. He had dark hair and was dressed in clothes you'd find in a history book. He was as solid as a normal person. Darkness seemed to form around his back, like he was connected to something. I glanced above him to see a large, misshapen shadow. It looked like a tall male figure whose arm was stuffed into the child's back. After I told my parents of that night, I was moved into a safer environment. I feel comfortable here, though the white walls can be a bit annoying to stare at, though it is comfy. Sometimes I get the occasional visit, and I was even given a new white jacket to wear. Yeah, I think I'm going to like it here.
Space Mountain is not what it seems. I was with my family at Walt Disney World this weekend, and now they no longer exist. I arrived at Magic Kingdom with my brother and my parents, and we couldn't wait to ride Space Mountain, as it is one of my and my brother's favorite attractions. However, when we were about to board, he said his stomach hurt, and as he's only 10, I let him wait outside for me. Didn't want to get vomit all over myself. I was the only one to board the coaster, and I sat in the front seat. However, the ride operator had an earring in his left ear, and I didn't know why this was important then, but I do now. I rode the ride and enjoyed it, but I remember feeling just wrong and uneasy. When I got off the ride, my brother was nowhere to be found, so I texted his phone and asked where he was. He told me he was back with Dad, so I told him I was just going to ride Space Mountain again, and I entered the line again to find there was no one waiting. I walked right through and was getting on the ride once more when I noticed something. The ride operator was now wearing his earring in his right ear. At first, I shrugged it off,
thinking I just didn't see correctly. But as I went through the ride again, I felt odd and queasy. When I disembarked the ride, I again texted my brother, asking where they were. No response. I texted my father, thinking my brother wasn't paying attention. When he responded, I asked why my brother hadn't responded. And my dad texted back, saying Grant didn't have a phone. Well, I thought he was joking. But when I pressed further, he told me again Grant had never owned a phone. I asked where they were, and he told me they were riding the land. And for those unaware, the land is a boring boat ride that teaches agricultural history. It is located in Epcot. I was extremely confused, as we were in the Magic Kingdom. But then I stepped outside, and my stomach began to twist into knots. Outside of Space Mountain, I could see the huge golf ball Epcot is known for. What the fuck? I went online, only to find Magic Kingdom didn't exist. It never had. I was getting more and more sick by the moment. This wasn't possible. I texted my dad saying I was going to head over to the land. It appears Space Mountain had replaced the Mission to Mars attraction. But I had to ride Space Mountain again. I had to find out what the hell was going on. Again, there was no one in line, so I zipped up to the front of the line. As I boarded the coaster, the very same man was now wearing earrings on both ears, and he had a nose ring. I was very sick, but rode through the ride once more. When it ended, the coaster no longer resembled a spaceship. It looked more like a train. My mind started spinning. What the fuck was happening? I got off and realized my phone had no service. When I stepped outside, I saw why. Magic Kingdom looked like it had when it was first built. I searched for Wi-Fi networks, but there was nothing, and I hesitantly asked a cast member what year it was. And he promptly told me it was 1975. I sat on a bench and broke down into tears. I couldn't comprehend what was happening to me. Every time I got off the ride, I was transported to a different world. I repeated the process several times, riding the ride over and over again. This time, the changes were small. Different areas were in different places. Thunder Mountain didn't exist. It's a small world had never been built. Thank God. I was getting some ice cream when I noticed there was a Wi-Fi access point. So I connected to the official Disney one and looked up what year it was. 2278. That was impossible. Disney World was still up and running? I then looked up a world map and was greeted with a completely different continental layout. There was no Africa. Asia was missing, and the US looked like a circle. I looked up major world events, only to find 10% of the world's population had survived an apocalypse. I say that because I could find nothing on this huge event. Anyway, I rode Space Mountain countless times before I hopped off to find men in suits staring at me, guns pointing at me, and they asked, "Where the fuck did you come from? This ride isn't even open." And I replied, "I've been riding this ride, and every time I get off, I'm in a different world. What's going on here?" It was then that I lost consciousness. I woke in a dark room with a chair. Nothing else, not even a window. I heard a faint, "He's awake," and the door opened. A different man in a military general outfit sat down next to me. He asked me the same thing the others had. How did you end up on that ride? He seemed very calm about it, so I told him everything I knew, including the trips to 1975 and 2278. He didn't seem shocked at all. He began to tell me that Space Mountain, if not all of them, were connected by dimensional portals. He told me it was created in 1975, the year the first Space Mountain was completed. He added it was only active if there was only one rider, and they sat in the front seat. He went on to say that there were infinite realities, and the scientists in this dimension created it. However, it caused a chain reaction, meaning many, if not all, universes where Disney World exists can be traveled to. They just couldn't pick which one to arrive at. So, the project was shut down, and they began to work on another experiment. However, in plenty of other realities, the portal was still active. They couldn't travel to each one and close it, so they gave up and left them open. He said that there were others like me, who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. When I asked him about my family, he gave me a sad look and said, "Look, they won't even notice your absence. Another you from another universe just did the same thing. They will go with your parents, and everything will be fine." I asked if there was a way to get to my original reality. He said that unless I wanted to ride Space Mountain 1,000,000 times to have a chance of getting back to my original universe, it was pointless. I wouldn't even know if I was in the right place anyway. He did, however, let me know they could find my family in this world. So, that was what they did. I'm now living with my parents again, but I no longer have a brother. And on the bright side, my family is rich in this reality. Oh, and one word of advice: don't ride Space Mountain alone.
I always loved camping. It has always been one of those things that I fell in love with as a kid. My dad and I used to go camping all the time when I was young. He would always tease me about the creatures that could come up to our tents: wolves, bears, or monsters. He would often scare me with a monster mask he would bring with him, stand outside the tent and pretend to be a monster just to spook me. It always worked. I went out camping last week. It's been 6 years since my dad died. I decided to go on my own to enjoy it, to relax, and to try to remember the good times I used to have with my father. I miss those fun times. I met a kind couple who was camped not too far away. They seemed so happy that I was almost jealous. The day went by just fine. It wasn't until that night that something went wrong. I woke up with a jerk. I could hear heavy breathing and footsteps around my tent. My heart raced, and I didn't know why. I was disoriented. I didn't know where I was at first, having almost forgotten that I had gone camping. And then I laughed, telling Dad to stop, but Dad was gone. he had been gone several years. That thing outside my tent was not my dad. I felt a strong fear build up inside me as the snaps of twigs echoed in the emptiness of the night. I heard no crickets, no wind, nothing, but the thick, heavy breathing that circled around my tent. A shadow cast upon my tent, the fire outside still barely burning. It was stretched, disoriented, but long jaws like a wolf could be seen with teeth that seemed out of place, crooked, and the thick slides of drool were caught in the shadow as it dropped. It had to be a wolf, or a bear, I couldn't tell. Dad always joked. I never thought it would actually happen. A deep snarl came from the beast outside. I was so scared, I couldn't scream. I reached for my phone to call someone, anyone, but no signal. The beast outside began to rub against my tent, a cracked snarl as it breathed deeply. It could smell me. I knew it. I don't know how, but I knew it was there for me. It was going to kill me. The tent began to get pushed in, the creature outside clawing and pawing at it. Then, suddenly, it launched itself forward, smashing the tent in as it snarled and cracked an eerie howl, like a wolf in the night, but wrong. This howl sounded man-made, in a way. I could not scream. My tent now halfway caved in as the beast tried to find me. It would know where I was if I screamed. A heavy paw ripped through the tent. I had to cover my mouth with my hands as tears welled up in my eyes. I thought I was going to die. I thought at first a bear paw, but its fur was missing, claws nearly 3 inches long, a toe broken and hanging off as if dead flesh and stitches. I saw stitches going around the beast's ankle, as if a human had helped it. I watched as the paw pulled out, and a wolf-like muzzle shoved its way into the hole, trying to get its head in. Those crooked teeth pointed outwards, a second set inside its muzzle like a shark ready to rip apart flesh. Stitches going across furless flesh as it snarled and growled, trying to rip into the tent more. Then, a voice. I felt my heart stop. Come out. Play with me. Love me. I thought I had imagined it, but it kept talking in an inhuman, cracked voice, like what you would hear in a distorted recording. But this beast's mouth was moving with every word. It spoke so fast, it's hard to remember it all, but I remember it kept repeating, "Love me." It demanded it. Demanded that I leave the tent and love it. I'll make you a part of me. We'll never be alone, always together, forever, in my flesh. I heard a scream outside my tent. A woman. I saw the light of a flashlight cross over the tent walls that hadn't caved in. An unearthly roar, the same human-created distorted noise. It was so loud, right over me. But then, it left. It got off of my tent. "Love me!" I heard it scream in the voice as it ran. I could only assume it was chasing the woman. I could hear her screaming, "Get off!" Blood-curdling screams of sheer horror as she cried. I was so scared, I could not move. Morning came. I could not sleep that night. I heard a man outside my tent calling to see if I was inside. It was a man dressed in a uniform. I guess he was the forest ranger that watched over the camping section. I slowly got out with his help. The couple that had been not too far from me. Their tent ripped to shreds, an area marked off by police. The man told me a murder had happened. I asked the stranger, what happened to the man who was with her? He gave me an odd look before asking, what man? She had apparently come alone, and I knew that wasn't right. I talked to them, and she seemed so happy. He helped me get my stuff into my car, and I packed up to leave and thanked him. As I closed my door, I heard him knocking on the window. I rolled it down, and fear struck into me as he stared at me with black eyes, red, inhuman pupils in the center, and tipped his hat. Those stitches around his wrist. You'll love me next time. You will never want to leave. I slammed on the gas pedal, looking in my side mirror as I drove away, a creepy smile on his face as he just watched. I've never gone back, and I'm so afraid of going camping now. When I tell the story to anyone else, they just tell me it must have been a bear, and I was just scared. But that was not a bear. I don't know what it was, but it talked to me. It wants me to love it. And I almost want to love him back. We could be together forever.